something about saying this is not okay. And that's where the anger comes from, about saying it's not okay, we recognize it's not okay, and we're going to fight back against it, is empowering rather than a kind of disempowering sense of being a victim. We need to hide, we need to be frightened. There's no need to hide, there's no need to be frightened.
Professor Milner, Chairperson of the South African Jewish Board of Deputies, thank you for joining. Had you known what you were taking on at a time like this, wow, would you have still done it?
So I have to tell you, it was such a hotly contested election. There were so many people desperate for this role at this time. It's amazing that I won.
Yes.
No, seriously. I think that nobody could have ever predicted what we were in for.
To be crude, Israel didn't predict what they were in for, but let's not go there. It's been an enormously difficult time. You've had the joy of our minister, Naledi Pandor, and everything, the gift that keeps on giving. You've had the ICJ, you've had higher levels of anti-Semitism, I think, than we've ever seen, if I'm not mistaken. Certainly it keeps you a little busy, doesn't it?
So it's kept me very busy, but what I am grateful for is I think a lot of people feel quite disempowered at this point. And firstly, I would like people to feel a bit more empowered. I think there's a lot you can do to feel more empowered. But for me, it's actually been, like, it's really given purpose and meaning to my life to be able to stand here at a time when people are, where we feel so strongly under attack and fight back.
It's actually so interesting because we've had a series of these conversations, and the theme that comes through is purpose, and it's almost the first thing that you went to, which is fascinating, because it is that. I think that if you can get behind something, know your role, whatever that role is at a time like this, I guess that'll help.
I think so. I think it's, it would be lovely to be a kind of chair of the board that spends all its time going to fancy cocktail parties.
Yes.
But really,
opening of museums, that would be nice. Yes.
But I started at the board as a result of an incident of anti-Semitism at the campus at which I work.
Oh, I didn't know this.
Wits University. So I wasn't a typical kind of board member. I teach at Wits University.
What do you teach?
I teach psychology.
Okay.
And there was a quite ugly incident of anti-Semitism, and having not really been involved in any Jewish organizations up until that point, I was quite horrified at what had happened. By the way, just to be clear to my employer, things are going really, really well at Wits University now, but I remember thinking, not on my watch, not on my campus, and I feel the same way now, that really we need to fight back. I have a strong sense of social justice, and that's really serving me well right now.
Yeah. So how is campus? Because I'm actually hearing good things. I'm hearing that it isn't what people feared it could be.
So I can mainly speak for Wits University, and I can tell you that there are some counter-protests at Wits University, but I have never, in fact, in all my years, and I've been at Wits for very, very many years, I don't think I have seen such a large proportion of visibly Jewish students. When I sit and have a cup of coffee, you can see the students. It seems to be a very comfortable campus for students, and I feel it's a very comfortable campus.
I'm so happy to hear that, because that's so important. I think that was so many of our one of our fears is when we see what's gone on campuses around the world, that the United States is not a very safe space for Jews at all on campuses. And to hear that Wits students are comfortable being openly Jewish is very good news.
Very much so. And if I can share one quick story, because I've just been in New York at the ADL, the Anti-Defamation Leave Conference. And after I finished speaking, a university student from America, I'm not sure what university she was at, and she came up to me and she started crying. And she said to me she's quite far away from her family, and she goes to Chabad on campus every Friday night. And to get to Chabad on campus, she has to go through a horde of protesters who scream the most disgusting, despicable anti-Semitic things. They are there every Friday night in front of the Chabad on campus. And she
because
stood there,
anti-Zionism?
Because anti-Zionism, yeah.
Right, okay.
And she stood there in front of me, and I looked at her and I said to her, okay, here's a tissue. I'm really sorry for what you're going through. You should never have to go through this. Now dry your eyes. And instead of being unhappy about this, get angry. Because that's really quite an energizing experience. There is no justification whatsoever for anybody to stand outside a Jewish religious event screaming and abusing Jewish people going to it. And I said, you will feel a lot better when you stop crying, get a bit angry, recognize that this has nothing to do with you, this hate has nothing to do with you, fight back, carry on going to Chabad on campus, go even more than you have been going before, because that's the only way to get
You're going to become a Chabad Shaliach.
She's going to be a Chabad Shaliach.
No, you are.
Oh, me.
You know how many people you're getting to Chabad.
Absolutely, but whether it's Chabad on campus, whether it's Hillel, whether it's soldiers, that is my response.
So it's so fascinating because I was asked to write a short piece for the Jewish Report coming out later this week about Danielle Perez. And just to put in context, we're recording this the day after the funeral. And my one concern was I was angry. I am angry. And I never, as a rule, I don't go onto social media when I'm angry. I don't write when I'm angry because it's just been something I've never allowed myself to do. And yesterday I thought to myself, you know what, I am angry. I'm okay to be angry. And I'm going to write whilst angry. And obviously, it doesn't mean you say things and write things inappropriately. But it's interesting that you're saying that there is an appropriate time to say, you know what, I am angry. I'm angry that this young woman has to face abuse on her own on the way to shul to prayer on a Friday evening. It's okay to be angry that a young man of 22 years old was mowed down and his body dragged into Gaza and not being returned. I think it's okay.
100%. I don't believe in like irrational
rage
I'm not spills over.
We're not talking about
but
that.
But I think that anger is a reasonably rational response to what we've had to put up with in a variety of contexts. And I think that there's something about saying this is not okay. And that's where the anger comes from, about saying it's not okay, we recognize it's not okay, and we're going to fight back against it, is empowering rather than a kind of disempowering sense of being a victim. We need to hide, we need to be frightened. There's no need to hide, there's no need to be frightened. I keep looking, so I don't know where it is, but I'm wearing a Magen David right now.
Right.
I keep looking for a bigger Magen David to wear, right. So I don't have to fight. But the reality is, I see you wearing hostage tags. I think, and I see, as I said before, wherever I go on my campus, whenever, lots and lots of places that I'm going to, having people who've never worn Magen Davids before wearing Magen Davids, that's a good response. We need to really come out, respond appropriately to this rather than give in to the overwhelming sense of hate and kind of withdrawal.
And learned helplessness in a way.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You know, because I think we can be taught that we should. Well, it's quite interesting because the generations that came before us, to some extent, my grandparents, my parents took that on as well. I remember when I went to Wits in the late 1980s, my parents were petrified because I was this liberal and I was going to get involved in student politics and the anti-apartheid movement. And they kept saying, you know, as a Jew, just be very, very careful because, you know, we don't want to be a target. And that was the response of my grandparents were Holocaust survivors and that next generation. And to some extent, I think it has to change because we can't be that anymore, or we can be that, but I'm not sure it's going to help us.
Well, I think that there's a huge difference between our parents' or grandparents' generation, even our parents' generation, for our age, and that is Israel. And as difficult a time as Israel has had now, it's a fundamentally different world from when our parents, and certainly our grandparents faced that level of anti-Semitism. And I think that as much as we are entitled not to have to put up with the kind of anti-Semitism that we've been putting up with lately, I also think it's important not to forget the fundamental difference between what was then and the fear that imbued Jewish communities in a pre-Israel world and what we can do in a post.
So actually, I read something so interesting, and it was written by somebody living in Israel, and they were saying what made October the 7th so terrible for people living through it was there was this systems failure. It was such a monument, such a huge attack when you had 3,000 people coming across the border. That nobody was really able to rely on the police, the army. People were pretty much on their own. And what this commentator said was, for one day, we knew what it was like not to have a functioning state. And the horror of that day was not that it could happen, because Israel always would have, even at a more significant cost, would still have pushed back ultimately and managed it. But just for that day, people felt what it was like not to have a functioning Israel. And that was the horror of the day. And I think what you're saying is right, because there is such a fundamental difference. Because October the 7th did end on October the next day. Because by the next day, it might have taken a little bit of time, but Israel regained its composure. And there was a state. And we have to remember that. And we have to acknowledge what that was, but also that we aren't back in October the 7th.
No. No, we talk often, and I hear it, and I to some extent agree with it, because it's my lived reality. People say we are still on October. The world never, every Jew in the world, kind of our world sort of stopped somehow on October the 7th, and perhaps until the hostages are back, maybe that will help, maybe that won't.
Well, in some ways, yes, but not in every way.
But not in every way, and I think it did point to vulnerability that resonated. And I mean, you're talking psychologist, I think it really raised all the kind of generational trauma that we've experienced.
I felt like I was back in the Holocaust, and I wasn't even in the Holocaust. It just re-traumatized us.
Absolutely. I mean, reading the stories of people in their safe rooms with their hands over their babies' mouths so people wouldn't be hurt. I don't think I don't think there's a Jew in the world who didn't think, we said never again. And look what happened. Once again, a Jew is hiding in a cellar or an attic, putting their hand over their child's mouth. And for all of that, and as I say, I get goose flesh. Having said that, though, as we've said all along, and we can't lose this. It stopped. It stopped. We all know what Hamas was trying to do. We all know perfectly well it didn't stop because Hamas got tired and decided, oh, okay, we've killed enough Jews, we'll go home now. It stopped because they were forcibly pushed back. Not quickly enough, but they were forcibly pushed back. Had Hamas been given the opportunity, we all know that would have gone across Israel. But it didn't. And I think that while we recognize the horror of October the 7th, we have to recognize that it did end within 24 hours, 48 hours at the most.
So would that be your message to people here? Because, well, in fact, the number of messages you've said, I would think that you've said you have found meaning and purpose and comfort in being active, finding your role. So I think that's one message, is find your role. Number two, recognize that although there are elements of Holocaust trauma, this isn't the Holocaust. It is still different because we have Israel, and the day ended. And yes, there might be hostages. There are countless families still in agony and mourning, and unfortunately because of the war there will still be more families in mourning. But the reality is that the situation isn't that, and we have to internalize that.
And I think there are a few more messages, particularly for South African Jews at the moment, because I think South African Jews, on top of the trauma of October the 7th, we kind of have a second date etched into our minds, which is the 29th of December, which is the date that our government decided to take Israel to the ICJ. And I think that was a real second trauma from the point of view of a community that was reeling already, and that then felt this was just yet another assault.
And another betrayal, a real betrayal.
A real betrayal of our community and of some kind of real sense of being South Africans. And I would say the same way, I'm going to go back to what I said right at the beginning. I think there are a few things we can take from that. Firstly, again, we can be angry at our government. Fortunately, the government doesn't have the kind of moral standing that, for example, the government of Mandela or even Thabo Mbeki have. This is a corrupt government that's taken a decision for its own reasons to go to the ICJ. So again, we're entitled to feel angry. It was the wrong thing to do. It was the wrong thing at a whole lot of
And
levels.
they're continuing it.
And they're continuing it. And the reason that it goes against their own foreign policy positioning, which is always to engage. So having said that, though, I think that there's a tendency again to want to withdraw as a result of that, to reject. And my response to that is always in the same way as I say, wear your Magen Davids, come out proudly as a Jew. I feel the same way. You don't have to withdraw from the feeling that you're a proud South African either. We live in a democracy. We live in a constitutional democracy. We can criticize our government.
Absolutely.
We can remain. We
preaching
do.
to the converted. Yeah.
And you're okay and I'm okay,
Right,
having done so very publicly.
Exactly.
And I think that what that really speaks to is the idea that for me, I'm a really proud Jew. I'm a proud South African, and I don't believe I have to give up any element of my identity.
I love that.
In South Africa. I love the bush. I love the people of Africa. I love the people of South Africa.
Our sense of humour.
I love our sense of humour. I
Unparalleled.
love the warmth.
100%.
We're an amazing country, which is unfortunately cursed with very poor leadership. It shouldn't make us any less proud and any less enjoying living in this really beautiful country of ours.
Absolutely awesome, Professor Karen Milner. Thank you for that conversation. I'm Howard Feldman. We're smiling in the dark.